A few days ago now, we saw the reveal of Obsidian's massive AAA RPG with Avowed. Many immediately drawing a comparison to Bethesda's Skyrim, as it does seem to take place in a similar setting, and of course Obsidian is almost most well known for their work on Fallout New Vegas. In the days since that reveal though, we have gotten a lot of interesting information, including one very large leak. As far as some of the features of this game, what we can expect from it as far as a gameplay perspective, and even things like mod support, but even some other things like additional analysis and lore based off the trailer, and actually some edits to product pages around Avowed that do seem to indicate something, or may even verify some aspects of this leak. The leak in general though does actually seem pretty reputable and does give us a lot of insight. If you guys enjoy the content or want to keep up to date with Avowed, you can get subscribed. I'm going to be talking a lot about this game, and in all likelihood basically talking about everything that comes out around this game. But for now, let's just take a look at this new leak around Avowed, which comes from the forum Reset Era from a user named Sponger. So of course with any leaks, and for most leaks, you should take them somewhat with a grain of salt, even from reputable sources, because things are subject to change, especially when they're not public knowledge. And with big leaks coming out right after the announcement or reveal of a new IP or game in general, you always have to be somewhat wary. On one hand, it's an easy and quick way to get a ton of attention quickly because there's a whole new audience looking for info on that new title. But separately, at times, we don't see games leak before their announcement because people don't want to spoil the big surprise, or that could just be seen as a lot worse. But we will see leaks after the game is already announced, giving additional context or further details, now that employees can actually acknowledge, yes, this thing exists. One famous and recent example with Fallout 76, we saw the game itself not really leak. We didn't know we were getting a multiplayer Fallout or even a Fallout, but the fact that multiplayer was coming did leak just after the initial teaser. So with this one, I will go through the leak first, and then I'll explain why I think it's reputable. So from this username Sponger, it does say, as I previously mentioned before the announcement, Obsidian is working on a Pillars game, as back then I did get confirmation that game contains spore-like creatures with a few other vague descriptions of the living lands. So what he's referring to there is what could be viewed as a correct prediction by this user. I believe what he's referencing here is a July 3rd post he made on a Xbox post on the same forum, where he described some of his expectations for the large July Xbox event, including Pillars of Eternity: The Living Lands. Pillars of Eternity 2, of course, are two other games from Obsidian. They're isometric RPGs, and this new game Avowed is going to be taking place in the same world as them, carrying over that lore at least somewhat. And it's not like this was a common expectation. Although we knew Obsidian was working on a large-scale RPG, we didn't know it would be a Pillars-based RPG. And with the Microsoft acquisition, I think a lot of people thought the Pillars franchise was dead and they were moving on to larger and greater things. So more or less, it seems like he had some minor information before about these spore-like creatures, which seemed to match things we've heard about from the Living Lands with Pillars of Eternity. I'll return to that in a moment though. But then now, after the reveal of the game, he did get some new information on Avowed. Reportedly, it's a full open world and much larger than Skyrim. But it doesn't just mean bigger, but rather a more proper world that is denser and more contrasted at the same time. So what I take that to mean is perhaps when it is dense, when it is urban, when you're in a castle, there's going to be a lot going on, a lot of things to do and a lot of people. But then of course, with it being this type of setting, there also will be big open spaces to explore. Primarily set in the Living Lands region of Aora being the name of the world in the Pillars of Eternity universe, although he's not sure if it'll go like that as explicit later on, but that was the starting point, so perhaps it'll just start in the Living Lands region, but actually expand elsewhere. And now that point is actually quite interesting. The Living Lands in the world of Aora are described as a frontier island area in the far north. You can see it here on the overall map. It's a land of wild weather, strange beasts, and hundreds of difficult to reach valleys containing oddities never before seen. It's a lawless land where communities band together, fall apart, and fight petty wars with each other constantly. The territory has a reputation for breeding oddballs and madmen, and that's a very interesting and unique way to take this game. To put it in a frontier area, not one of the more established, explored, or built upon continents, but rather actually have a setting where the building is happening while we're playing the game, and perhaps you're just seeing factions or really one major empire in particular take over that land. And I bring this up because there is actually one very interesting connection that can be made around this. There's been a lot of analysis and breakdowns on the trailer from a lore perspective. It's an Obsidian game. Of course, there's a ton of lore, backstory, and intrigue produced from the first two Pillars of Eternity games. So a couple of posts as well as a nice video have popped up just trying to analyze the trailer with knowledge of that lore. I'll actually have them linked down below. It's a great watch one way or another. And from this, there are several pretty consistent takeaways. It seems like the narrator here has an Adirian accent, Adir being one of the largest empires in this world and actually controlling one continent specifically. As far as the landscapes we see in the background, this actually fit for that continent. The sword we could see in the trailers is literally named Oathbinder, and this translation is translating it from Adirian script. And we know based off this banner or flag that it actually is representing the deity of Wodika. That's that little crown you can see there. But of course, this is almost an edited version of that. Wodika was a deity that is particularly important in the empire of Adir and among the Adirian people, with one such people in particular, the Steel Galantes, following Wodika very closely, and these are the inhabitants of much of the lands and regions of Adir. So taking those factors together, it's thought that this banner is in fact the banner of the Steel Galantes. And overall, the trailer has a lot of mentions of oaths and matches with the themes of the Wodika deity overall. All of this being very important because in Pillars of Eternity, you could find a book called The Reclamation of the Living Lands, the Living Lands reportedly being the place this game is going to take place in, and this book reads, the forces of the faithful left Adir with the exhortation from the, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that, still ringing in their ears. Let not the sullen, wild people of that lawless continent continue to suffer beyond the guidance hand of the queen that was and shall be again. Deliver them of their savagery that they might join us in civilization and reap soon the rewards of their newfound piety. As your queen demands, so do too I. Take up the burden of empire, free them from themselves. So taking this all together, it certainly seems like the people of Adir, perhaps the Steel Galantes in this particular instance, are actually going to this new frontier region, that with the Living Lands, and well, that's going to be the premise of the game. We don't really know what'll happen here. Clearly there are castles, perhaps it'll expand beyond just this particular island. That's a lot of explanation for just that one particular thing, but of course the setting is pretty important, and it definitely seems like it could be backed up with what we know thus far. It's also described how there'll be a big focus on world reactivity, lighting, and next-gen AI systems and physics. A special focus on physics with magic systems. It seems like this was sent to the leaker in almost a list style, as just different gameplay attributes, so he doesn't inherently know how all of this will function. It's not like he saw gameplay. That definitely could be pretty cool. A reactive world is something a lot of us love from RPGs, and in particular with Fallout New Vegas, that was a huge staple and a very good aspect of that game. Your choices having consequences. A physics-heavy magic system also could be very interesting. A real-time weather system is described, with reportedly things like fog being important as a real-time element, and rivers will have specific microphysics, a very advanced character creation tool, and the big one, mod support. Being described as for PC now, but will be very dominant as a creation tool and will be fully functional on Xbox. This is a big one, because reportedly this game is still years away. So if mod support is not an afterthought, but actually a focus with the development of Avowed, I think this has huge potential to actually live up to the hype of a Skyrim killer of sorts. With a lot of games, you kind of get in a situation where they release the game and maybe, perhaps, mod support will come later. A core problem with that being a lot of people have moved on once the mod support actually comes, and oftentimes when it's not a core concept from the get-go, it's kind of haphazardly added. Few games have the modability of something like a Bethesda game, and specifically like Skyrim. But clearly with Avowed, even right now, there's a huge interest from the Bethesda modding community because a lot of them love Skyrim, a lot of them love Fallout New Vegas. They're viewing this new Avowed game as kind of a similarity. So if mod support is a day one feature, if it actually is quite well fleshed out, and hypothetically, if it is being considered or almost confirmed this far in advance, I could certainly see Obsidian realizing, hey, there's going to be a lot of people interested in this game, and if we actually cater to that modding scene, it may pay dividends after the fact. And I think that could be really huge here. Even though there are games like Skyrim, very few have had the modability of Skyrim. and this could definitely be one of them, especially considering it is in UE4/UE5. Apparently there's going to be a very large number of factions, but with a different approach than Skyrim. There'll be companions in the game, but different to the companions in the Outer Worlds. The story itself is going to be fighting against an incoming threat of tyranny, and it will be somewhat independent from the past stories. The game will have certain bosses, and some of the bosses are going to be very large. Guards will have a special say in the game, so likely some kind of significant role. Gods played a pretty big role in the first two Pillars of Eternity games, but the ending events of the second game may suggest that the gods have lost some power, although you're probably better off just watching a full recap video of that game to fully understand that impact. There'll be a big focus on iconic landmark statues and buildings. The statue we see in the trailer looks like it is a representation of Galawain. He is the seeker god and is often depicted with a wolf of some kind, which you could more or less see here. He's the patron god of hunt in all its forms, so this definitely could be representative of this part of the leak. Two large cities are planned, but also several smaller ones. There's going to be contrasting wild areas that have rivers, mountains, and desolated areas. Apparently swimming will be a feature of this game. It will fully respect the legacy Pillars of Eternity creature lore and add new additions. There's a dynamic presentation of the dialogue. Currently in development, they are maintaining that somewhat Obsidian staple of killing everyone in a playthrough if you want to go that route. There are around 100 people on the project for 2 years now, but there's been a smaller number for the 7 months of pre-production, so roughly 2 years, 7 months in development, but only for the 2 years have they had the full 100 developers. And then lastly, the game is already in full production, the team is still planned to expand, and the target release date is late 2022 or early 2023. And that last point definitely might be a blow to some people. I know I, for one, was certainly hoping for a late 2021, although some additional evidence that may suggest this actually is pretty far away. In my original video covering Avowed, I mentioned how, on the website, it was actually listed as being a part of Xbox One, and seemingly, to some degree, if it's going to be on Xbox One, it has to be coming out somewhat soon, within the next couple of years. Microsoft has described they want to continue support Xbox One for a while, even things like Halo Infinite are going to be backported to the old console, except it actually was just removed. The official website of Avowed was edited a couple of days after it went live, and it no longer lists it being an option for Xbox One. And if it's not coming to Xbox One, I don't think this game is realistically coming within the next couple of years. It is still at least a year or two away. And I would say that fact alone pretty much rules out 2021, because I'm sure the Xbox One will still have considerable market share and an active player base in 2021. And frankly, all that we've heard about this game really supports that. It's described consistently as being a next-gen project developed for Xbox Series X. And actually that release date timing is pretty interesting, because if it does end up being on the latter half a 2023 release, this would be a potential huge competitor to the next Elder Scrolls game, not inherently being a Skyrim killer, but actually a big foe around the Elder Scrolls 6. Which is highly speculated to be coming out in 2024. Although let's be honest, the vast majority of us would buy both if they're a year apart anyway. Taking it all together, I feel like this is one of those leaks where, yeah, sure, it could be true. Nothing in here is super crazy or out there. It all falls in with the existing information. And just in general, a lot of this is just generic next-gen RPG feature list or wish list. Nothing's kind of crazy. But with that being said, I actually think this is a legitimate leak, and let me explain why. So this account on Reset Era named Sponger actually was only created earlier in 2020. It's a relatively new account, although it did claim to share past information on Inzile. This just being some generic insider info. I'll have links to these posts down below. One of the interesting points around this being he actually explained how he knew that information, potentially, saying, I'm running one company that's doing some stuff in the industry regarding PR, data protection, and artificial intelligence. More than that, I can't tell. Ask Fargo on Twitter, is it true? Probably he'll answer you. If not, he'll personally address it at some point. Fargo being the head of Inzile. But even further, at the time, one of the moderators said staff has spoken with Sponger and can confirm it's plausible that he has access to this kind of info. We can't verify the info itself. That was for the past leak, but for the most recent one, we actually saw an interesting response from Clobril, whose name I'm probably butchering, but that's okay, where he says, from everything I know, he is legit. Clobril being one of the most reputable Xbox insiders, where almost everything he's leaked or predicted in the past forecast has ended up coming true. Even just an easy one recently that Obsidian would be at the Xbox showcase with their new RPG, which of course, that's literally what we're talking about, ended up being true. And in particular, this particular tweet is a big deal. I definitely feel a lot more confident in the Avowed leak overall with this kind of badge of approval somewhat. So overall, it certainly seems like that was a pretty massive info dump on this upcoming game, and I wouldn't be shocked if for a while after this, we don't actually hear more. It might take a while for Obsidian to even reveal or announce some of these features, because again, hypothetically, this game is still a couple years away. One other thing we did recently learn, reportedly Josh Sawyer is not on Avowed, but otherwise, yeah, that's a good recap or some new info on this game, and what likely was the first leak and a pretty big one, revealing a lot of details that we wouldn't have known about otherwise. I'm very excited for this game. I think it's going to be a huge, interesting entry in this area, and in particular, if they really are planning on taking on mod support this early on, if it is going to be a big thing here. Like with the Outer Worlds, apparently mod support might come at some point, but even with that game, if it got mod support now, it wouldn't be huge. Unavowed is looking like it's going to be a big budget, big game. Seemingly we'll have 4 years at least of development time, so it should be something pretty meaty. It's been a long time since we've seen a proper large-scale AAA RPG from Obsidian, and one featuring mod support also could be something massive to really get excited for. As always, again, I thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, but until next time, I hope to see you all later.